But it will be a corner for West Ham as Cucurella goes down. And it might all kick off there.
Let me tell you something.
Hello everyone, hope you're doing well and welcome to the 5th edition of the Football Iconic Season Review. Today we look back on and review the 2025-26 football season of the top 5 leagues in Europe by UEFA coefficient. Surprise, surprise, it's England, Italy, Spain, Germany, and France. For all the chaos that happened on the pitch, some of the biggest stories happened off of it. La Liga wanted to send Villarreal against Barcelona to Miami, while Serie A explored taking Milan against Como to Perth. And these weren't cup games or anything like that, these were league fixtures. Domestic leagues played thousands of kilometers away from domestic supporters. The message was and is clear: the global audience is the priority. Players across every La Liga fixture stood still for the first 15 seconds, and the league's response was to instruct broadcasters not to show it. In the end, the plans were scrapped. The battle was won, but the war has just begun. France, meanwhile, spent the year in crisis mode as their broadcasting deals went haywire. DAZN walked away, so Ligue 1 was forced to take control of distribution through Ligue 1 Plus. Ligue 1's broadcasting income for the 24-29 cycle was sold on a headline of 700 million euros a year, 500 domestically. By 25-26, with DAZN gone, the LFP's initial distribution revenue pool fell to 330 million euros in total, domestic and international. And even that included 40 million belonging to Ligue 2 and an 85 million one-off termination payment from DAZN. For some added perspective, Liverpool alone received about 200 million euros from the Premier League in 24-25. To illustrate what all of this meant, in an official statement, Angers claimed that they expected 19 million euros in broadcasting money in 2025. Their expectations dropped to 3 million by 2026. It shines a different light on Lyon's restrictions, Lille's continued selling off of important players, and Paris FC's influx of new money, all of which we'll be getting into later on. In Italy, yet another refereeing controversy came to light, this time involving VAR interference. Juventus and Milan both missed the Champions League, then the national team lost to Bosnia on penalties, missed a third straight World Cup, and watched the federation's president, the delegation chief, and the manager all leave inside 72 hours. Aston Villa won a trophy for the first time in decades, and Wolfsburg's 29-year Bundesliga stay then ended in a relegation playoff. As we can see, not every defining story happened near the top, although arguably the biggest happened, aptly, at the biggest possible stage. It involved Paris turning into Gotham City, and Gabriel, Sergio Ramos, and Jonathan Tah's penalties having a meetup in outer space. The Premier League season was a monumental season for a lot of reasons. However, one of the largest was the utterly insane amount of hate watches per weekend. I believe Opta are going to be including this stat in future reports. Arsenal finally followed through on the mythical process in ways that give the Sixers full-on PTSD. For the first time since 2003-04, they were crowned Premier League champions. After 3 straight seasons of second-place finishes, the fear of the dreaded quadruple coming alive was deeply embedded in each gunner. There were some bobbles along the way. Ceding the first-place spot to Man City late in the year after a defeat to the Citizens caused the bottle jokes per capita to skyrocket across the globe. Thankfully, for the Gunners, the jokes were short-lived. In the end, Mikel Arteta's team-building tactics were finally vindicated. From hiring someone to pickpocket his players during a team dinner, to bringing speakers on the pitch with pre-recorded stadium noises from Anfield, to explaining modern illumination.
Edison invented the light bulb. I want to see a team that is connected with each other and that shines.
All of this resulted in Arsenal being the best defense in the league. 19 clean sheets kept by David Raya, the lowest XG against, fewest big chances against, fewest shots, and fewest shots on target conceded in the top 5 leagues. They also went the entire campaign without a red card. Gabriel and Saliba were immense all year. Saka was his usual glittering self. All the new signings played immense roles. Declan Rice covered so much ground, it's a wonder how he's still standing. It wasn't a victory that was universally received, though. In 2025-26 alone, 25 goals were scored from non-penalty set pieces. Many complained about Arsenal's game management. The Wolves social team produced a 1-minute compilation of Arsenal's time wasting while being a goal up against them. At this point, 31 games had been played in the league, and Wolves had only won 1. Rival supporters had a field day with this one. However, it was Arsenal that had the last laugh. The football may not have been pretty to some, but it was goddamn effective. Their Champions League campaign came agonizingly close to proving just that. After 120 minutes of football, Arsenal denied PSG a win, taking it to penalties, but unfortunately lost. Gabriel's penalty will feed meme generators for an eternity. On to another result, which was unfortunately the same for Arsenal. The League Cup final. For the final time, Pep Guardiola and Manchester City were able to snatch a trophy away from Arsenal. With victory in the League Cup coupled with an FA Cup victory, the Spaniard bid farewell to Manchester City and the English Premier League. Premier League rivals were spotted falling to their knees in joy in supermarkets across the globe. Wizard of Oz, the Witch is Dead type vibes, if you know what I mean. Man City's season, it was odd. After the hangover of the treble win in 2023, the club has been in consistent transition, which culminated in Guardiola, for the first time in his career, going 2 full seasons without winning the league. This, despite the usual silly levels of squad reinforcement. Erling Haaland remained devastating and scored 27 goals. Donnaruma's 15 clean sheets also justified the decision to replace Edison. However, City had already lost 4 times after 12 matches. Guardiola's worst opening to a league season at the club. And even though they came agonizingly close to bridging the gap, things just didn't work out. Guardiola left England after 10 years in charge of Man City. In a 7-year period, he won 6 Premier League titles and continued to win despite the transition. The only comparison he has in the league is with Sir Alex Ferguson when it comes to raw numbers. And while we can all sit here and argue about circumstance and non-footballing matters, all that we can definitively say is that he is a legend of City and of the Premier League and will never be forgotten. For different reasons, the same can actually be said about Ruben Amorim. Manchester United began the season under Ruben Amorim after reshaping their entire attack and getting rid of players deemed surplus to requirement. 40 million? For Garnacho? What? This is a prank, right? Nothing encapsulated the confusion of the Amorim era better than scenes of him failing to make his beloved 3-4-3 formation work while losing to 4th-tier Grimsby Town. How was this allowed to happen? Nobody knows. After refusing to budge and reaffirming that
I came here to be the manager of Manchester United, not to be the coach.
He was gone. Michael Carrick took over, abandoned the back 3 for a 4-2-3-1, restored Kobe Mainoo, who had not started a league match under Amorim, and produced one of the season's most dramatic turnarounds. This is the table before Carrick took over. This is the table after he took over. It's insane stuff, really. Of course, he was made the permanent coach after this. Bruno Fernandes was named as the Premier League Player of the Year and broke the Premier League assist record, even though his final assist was a tad bit questionable. But we don't talk about that. Champions League football awaits, and the hope of the return to glory is reignited. For Aston Villa, though, they are currently in the midst of their own glory days. The 25-26 season was undoubtedly their best and most successful season in the modern era. Not only have they qualified for the Champions League for the 2nd time in 44 years, they won the Europa League, their first major trophy since 1996, and their first European trophy since 1982. UEFA Europa League? More like Unai Emery League. With this victory, he surpassed himself. After beating Freiburg very convincingly, he's now on a record 5 Europa League titles with 3 different clubs. Unai Emery extracted more from this squad than the underlying numbers suggested. Villa finished 4th despite some performance models placing them closer to 12th. And all this after being the butt of every joke after his time with Arsenal back in 2019. Since then, Emery has surely had several good evenings. The same cannot be said for Arne Slot, whose good times in a Liverpool dugout are long gone. The defending champions suffered a truly baffling collapse. The year prior, Liverpool won the league and then proceeded to spend heavily. Alexander Isak and Florian Wirtz alone combined for over £200 million. All this for the club to collapse and never find their way back in the race whatsoever. It must be said that Liverpool also entered the season grieving the death of Diogo Jota and his brother Andre Silva in a road accident on the 3rd of July 2025. Jota's death at only 28 years of age was far bigger than football and an obvious marker on the season's performance. In my eyes, unfortunately, the team looked far worse than 5th place for much of it. Isak struggled, Florian Wirtz struggled. Salah registered 14 goal contributions in 23 league starts. That's right, these are career high numbers for a lot of wingers actually, a lot of world-class wingers. But for Mohamed Salah, it's a sign to start learning Arabic. What? He's Egyptian. I just assumed because of the Christmas tree. And after 9 years with Liverpool, Mohamed Salah bid his goodbyes, and just like that, both Mohamed Salah and Kevin De Bruyne, widely known as the greatest Premier League players between 2017 and roughly 2024, were gone. Thankfully for the Liverpool faithful, England's strong coefficient meant 5th place qualified them for the Champions League. And while they're there in the UCL, the manager of the team that finished one place directly below them will be leading the line. Under Andoni Iraola, Bournemouth produced the best league season in their history and qualified for the Europa League for the first time. This was achieved despite losing key guys in Dean Huijsen, Milos Kerkez, Ilya Zabani, and Antoine Semenyo. Junior Krupi scored 13 league goals. Adrian Tufford became one of the league's most reliable fullbacks, and Iraola retained Bournemouth's aggressive pressing identity despite the turnover. Sunderland was the season's biggest surprise. Rather than simply trying to preserve their Premier League status, they reconstructed a squad led by Granit Xhaka, and funnily enough, after joining Sunderland, Xhaka stated the following, quote, "I believe this experience at Sunderland will greatly benefit my future. I want to pursue a career as a coach. That's why it's important to experience moments of suffering and solidarity. We'll have to suffer a lot in the coming months. That's another side of football, and it will shape me." End quote. Well, they finished 7th, qualified for the Europa League, and most importantly, completed a league double over Newcastle. I don't think there was all that much suffering. Job Bellingham left at the start of the year, continuing the trend of Bellingham brothers saying no to the Premier League. I wonder how long this will last for. Sunderland did not create an enormous volume of opportunities. They had the fewest shots of any non-relegated team, but they were disciplined, physically competitive, and difficult to break down. Brighton returned to Europe despite another summer of major squad turnover. Times may get tough, but this team, being a Premier League mainstay with their revolutionary models of recruitment and play, is just always extremely impressive to think about. Perhaps even more impressive is Danny Welbeck enjoying the most productive league season of his career, scoring 13 goals. He's come a long way since this banger back in 2008, which I never need a reason to go back and watch. Brighton's reward was Conference League qualification. Brentford appeared vulnerable after losing Thomas Frank to Tottenham Hotspur, alongside Brian Mbeumo, Johan Wissa, and Christian Norgard, who all went away themselves. Keith Andrews nevertheless delivered an excellent first season in management. Igor Thiago was the revelation. After injury scuppered his first year in England, he scored 22 goals in his second and finished only second behind Erling Haaland in the goal-scoring charts, 9th place. Chelsea, and I guess for some reason, Donald Trump, began the season as Club World Cup champions and spent big again. A total of £285 million was spent for 10th place. Like Manchester United, 2026 started off with their head coach leaving the building. This was after it was confirmed that Enzo Maresca had met with Manchester City over a suspected imminent vacancy. Coincidentally, after the season's end, he was presented to the world in sky blue and had to apologize for disrupting Chelsea's year. Maresca's complaints were aplenty. He fell out with the board, but it was a bit more than that. He was at odds with not only the Chelsea board, but the medical staff and everyone in between. Liam Rosenior, formerly of Strasbourg, another club owned by the Chelsea ownership, took over and things went well initially, until it all fell apart and he was labeled as LinkedIn Liam due to his behavior being perceived as performative, huddling around the center circle, buzzwords such as respect the ball and, of course,
in English, manage, if you split the two words, it's man, age. You're aging men.
He was dismissed in April, following 5 consecutive defeats without Chelsea scoring at all. Their worst string of performances since 1912. Still, they made it to the FA Cup final, losing to City. Fulham remained competitive, but like almost everyone else in this bracket, narrowly missed out on Europe. Harry Wilson contributed 17 goals and assists, more than a third of Fulham's 47 league goals. Talk about dependency. But they were also a club fully capable of the extraordinary in any direction. Their 5-4 defeat to Manchester City was one of the matches of the season. Harrison Reed's 97th minute equalizer against Liverpool was voted as goal of the season. And honestly, he probably could have taken a few more touches. The state of Liverpool that season. Sadly for Fulham, Marco Silva left for Benfica in June, closing the most stable 5-year period for the club in the Premier League era. Newcastle's season was a return to pre-Saudi form, which, as you know, isn't a very flattering thing to say. Unfortunately, it started off very rocky, overshadowed by the Alexander Isak to Liverpool saga. The replacements did not provide an immediate return. Wissa and Elanga combined for only 6 league goals, despite costing more than £100 million altogether. The disruption around Isak's transfer clearly affected Newcastle's preparation early in the year, and it seemed like they never actually got going. Their away form was particularly poor. They dropped from 5th to 12th, missing Europe altogether. We've already mentioned the back-to-back Tyne-Wear derby losses. Although a round of 16 run in the Champions League was genuinely top stuff, but a 7-2 bashing by Barcelona was less top. Everton's first season at the Hill Dickinson Stadium represented a fresh start. David Moyes was uplifted by Jack Grealish's loan from Manchester City and immediately raised expectations around the club. And the year, it was decent, all things considered. 13th place, allowing the club to concentrate on building around the new stadium rather than fighting relegation. Jordan Pickford's save against Joshua Zirkzee, it lives rent-free in my head. What a shame. Leeds successfully avoided immediate relegation, suffered by so many recently promoted teams. A 14th place finish and an FA Cup semi-final appearance is pretty good stuff. Onwards and upwards, I guess. Crystal Palace was an interesting case. Sales of star boys Eberici Eze to Arsenal and Mark Gahey's January transfer to Manchester City were not ideal. Their finishing was extremely wasteful. At some points, it did appear as though it would be somewhat of a train wreck of a year. Glasner was threatening to leave at numerous points too. And then, all of a sudden, it was one of their greatest years. Jean-Philippe Mateta scored the only goal as Palace beat Rayo Vallecano 1-0 in Leipzig to win the Conference League in their debut major European campaign, meaning that Palace had gone their entire existence without a major trophy, just under 120 years, only to win the FA Cup and Conference League back-to-back. With that, Oliver Glasner, who was already a legend, by the way, became immortal at Selhurst Park. Perhaps his biggest achievement was making everyone forget that winners of a European Cup were eliminated from the FA Cup by non-league Macclesfield. I mean, I don't remember it. I don't think anyone does. I don't see anyone bringing it up. Nottingham Forest went from Champions League contention the previous season to a relegation battle, and stories of their owners less than legal ties flooding the newsfeed. Nuno Espirito Santo was dismissed, Ange Postecoglou lasted only 39 days without winning at all, Sean Dyche came and left, and Vitor Pereira became Forest's 4th manager of the campaign. Morgan Gibbs-White more or less kept them alive after scoring 15 league goals. Impressive, but it makes sense considering that he probably signed his contract extension at the beginning of the year at gunpoint. Tottenham Hotspur. Oh, Tottenham Hotspur. The team that plays in a £1 billion stadium that came dangerously close to one of the most extraordinary relegations in football history for the second year in a row. No Heung-min Son, no Harry Kane, and the party stops, it seems. Daniel Levy's departure further reinforced the end of an era. Spurs were reigning Europa League holders in the year, so Thomas Frank had big expectations around him. Frank only won 2 of his final 17 league matches and was dismissed in February. Igor Thiago replaced him, but lasted little more than 6 weeks, collecting 1 point from 5 matches. Roberto De Zerbi became Tottenham's 3rd manager of the season and somehow steadied the team. There are a few clips that describe how chaotic this campaign was for Spurs, then watching them change their goalkeeper after falling 3-0 behind in the opening 16 minutes of a match against Atletico Madrid. Few clips describe how grateful teams were to play against these guys than Atletico Madrid supporters preparing sandwiches while Spurs trailed 4-1. When you're so comfortable in a knockout tie that you just stop watching and stop making dinner, it's kind of crazy. Another season low involved Spurs fans leaving before halftime during another collapse against Crystal Palace. The De Zerbi appointment was clearly a masterstroke because they survived. However, the same cannot be said about West Ham United. The squad was unbalanced and lacked pace, goals, and defensive reliability. Graham Potter was dismissed in September and replaced by Nuno Espirito Santo, but the change did not solve the underlying problems. Relegation. Burnley and Wolves suffered the same fate. However, their fate was sealed much earlier than West Ham. Both could not create or score enough to compete, and victories were rare. Which is quite an interesting thing to say because Wolves, in a weird way, actually improved over the course of the year. But the only reason that is notable is because they were well on course to being the worst Premier League team of all time. In the entirety of 2025, Wolves did not manage a single win in the league in the 25-26 season. So for them to win 3 times in the second half of the year is quite impressive, I guess. By the way, one of the teams they beat was Liverpool. The same Liverpool who for the second year in a row were defeated by what is already one of football's great modern dynasties. Before 2025, PSG had never won a UCL title since their formation in 1970. They'd come close and everyone knew it was the ultimate goal of the Qatari ownership, but it seemed like it would never happen. And then it happened. Twice. In a row. The decision to move the squad away from the superstar-focused model of earlier years towards a young, technical, versatile collective has made them into the undisputed champions of Europe, and Luis Enrique, now with 3 Champions League trophies to his name, will likely be the greatest manager in PSG history for a very, very long time, if not forever. Paris Saint-Germain won their 5th consecutive Ligue title and 14th overall, but the race was not one of those uncontested runs that many may be used to. Losing Gianluigi Donnarumma due to reportedly outrageous wage demands was less than ideal. However, they were getting what was marketed as the face of French goalkeeping for years to come, Lucas Chevalier from Lille. It didn't take too long for Matvei Safonov to be considered PSG's number 1. Apart from that though, almost everything else remained equal from the previous year. PSG were again France's best attacking and defensive side, scoring 74 goals and conceding only 29. Their average starting lineup was only 24 years old, and 6 academy players made first-team debuts during the campaign, and also somehow João Neves still managed to get his head on the ball of every cross. Makes little sense, but here we are. Although, perhaps PSG should be a little bit careful. Paris FC, a team whose stadium is literally within sight of the Parc des Princes, have been making some moves lately. Paris FC eliminating PSG from the Coupe de France is something few predicted, but it happened. After an absence from Ligue for almost 5 decades, the club returned to France's top division. They are majority owned by the Arnault family, the family behind LVMH, which means that the club's financial backing allowed it to build a squad capable of more than merely surviving. They may have only finished 11th this season, but they're definitely worth keeping an eye on going forward. In time, perhaps they could challenge for the league. However, for the time being, that responsibility fell on Lens. Finishing only 6 points behind PSG, Lens were clearly the season's main contenders to the throne. Will still resigned before the campaign, and former Lyon manager Pierre Sage was appointed in his place. He quickly created a more expansive team than many expected, and they thrived, particularly through Florian Thauvin and Thomassen. Thauvin had a monumental year. You might remember him from his Marseille days and an overall interesting career, a World Cup to boot. With 11 goals from the midfield, he flourished in this setup. Edouard and Wesley Said scored 12 each, while Thomassen led the league with 10 assists. Lens did not win the league, but they made the title race meaningful and demonstrated that PSG could still be challenged by a club operating with a fraction of their resources. Lens did, however, beat Nice 3-1 in the Coupe de France final on the 22nd of May, making this their first Coupe de France win ever and ensuring that they at least walked away with something to show for their incredible year. So often in Liga, a team will rise up, not do just enough to win the league, and then immediately crumble, leaving little trace of their near heroics for future generations. Not this time. Lille entered the season facing a rebuild. The loss of Chevalier to PSG was a big reason. Jonathan David left, Angel Gomez left. Replacing David's goals and Chevalier's influence appeared extremely difficult, but Bruno Genesio's team remained consistent. At one point, Lille produced a 13-game unbeaten run that established them in the Champions League positions. Uzer was arguably the most successful addition. He led Ligue 1 with 13 clean sheets and allowed Lille to remain competitive in close games, which made a difference as what defined them was refusing to back down. Lille scored 23 goals in the final 15 minutes of matches, the highest total in the division, turning draws into wins and defeats into recoveries on a scale nobody else managed. On the 24th of June 2025, French football's financial regulator ordered Lyon's administrative relegation. The disaster in leadership that was John Textor and his team threatened the top-flight status of one of the country's most successful teams. He was replaced as president. Lyon were allowed to play under heavy restrictions, and luckily, they came out on top with a 4th place finish. They had to sell or release some big names, Ryan Cherki, Alexander Lacazette, Saïd Benrahma, but all in all, Lyon were never deep enough to threaten PSG. However, the midfield held experience and goals. Corentin Tolisso and Sulch scored 11 goals each. They conceded only 40 goals, the 3rd best defensive record in France. Endrick's loan gave the season its global audience and put a lot of eyeballs on them, which paid dividends in a couple matches, even if it meant Carlo Ancelotti couldn't bear to watch Ligue 1 anymore. Marseille just seemed like they were always in crisis. They lost 1-0 at Rennes against 10 men on match day 1. In the dressing room afterwards, Adrien Rabiot and Jonathan Rowe decided to have a scrap, followed by both being transfer listed within days. Manager at the time, Roberto De Zerbi, was visibly in shock when speaking about the incident, saying, quote, "It was a bar fight in front of the sporting director, in front of the coach. No teeth were broken during the fight, but it was like a fight I've never seen in all my years in football." End quote. Rowe went off to Bologna, Rabiot to Milan, so I guess sending them both to Italy so they can play against each other and be another country's problem was the move. With lots of big names coming through the door, this was supposed to be a big year for them. Mason Greenwood scored 16 goals with 7 assists, but had disciplinary issues. Unsurprisingly, it seems that this runs in the club's DNA. The defense was horrible. They conceded 45 and repeatedly surrendered points after performances that looked like wins. A 5-0 hammering against PSG in February was a pretty deep cut. The manager left the building to join Spurs, which is a sentence that does a lot to explain the situation. In the end, 5th place isn't too bad, but they really should have been up there with Lens. Rennes found gold in Esteban Lepol, literally. With 21 goals in the league, he scooped up the Ligue 1 scoring title. He was not the quickest or the most technically spectacular striker in the division, but his movement and finishing was simply better than everyone else's, and Rennes' entire attacking output was built around that. A mid-season sacking might spell danger to some, but in the end, they finished 6th, and thanks to Lens winning the Coupe de France, they even secured a spot in the Europa League instead of the Conference League. Paul Pogba made a big return to football after serving a lengthy suspension for using a banned substance. He then proceeded to look like a shell of his former self with Monaco. It's not that surprising that 18 months away from football doesn't really help non-retired football players, especially when they're not injured either. 1 start, 115 minutes. No goals, no assists. Otherwise, Monaco are another case of a squad that should have challenged for the top spots, yet did not. Eric Dyer, Folarin Balogun, Lucas Hradeski, Ansu Fati, Stanis Idumbo. The ceiling looked high. But in the end, their final game of the season was an apt description of the state of affairs. Monaco led Strasbourg 4-1 at one point. Lots of promise. And then they lost 5-4 in the exact same game, confirming a 7th placed finish. The team on the other end of that comeback had one of the youngest average starting 11s in all of Europe. 21 years, 332 days on average. It was also more or less Chelsea's B team. Kendry Pice, Mamadou Sarr, Ben Chilwell, Mike Penders. It's what the Blueco pipeline looks like in action. The Ultras noticed. They opened one fixture with 15 minutes of silence, and at one point, Chelsea and Strasbourg supporters staged a joint protest. Then in January, as Strasbourg were looking quite good, Liam Rosenior, their coach, left to become Chelsea's head coach. Of course. Gary O'Neill took over, Joaquin Panicelli scored 16 in his first Ligue season, and the year actually ended decently, reaching the Conference League semi-finals. Toulouse finished 9th, and were never once in danger of anything, but never really did much else. Jan Goho was a reason to watch them, 77 dribbles, the most in Ligue 1, and the man they went to every single time Toulouse needed to move the ball forward through pressure rather than building up slowly. For a promoted side, Lorient stayed up without ever really sweating, which is an achievement in itself. They weren't without some headlining scores though. Lille beat them 7-1, they then beat Rennes 4-0 and Monaco 3-1. There was no middle setting, it seems. On to the CBS team's favorite team.
After 4 games, who here likes Brest? I'm interested, how much do you enjoy watching them? Would you pay to watch them?
I have done.
2 years ago, Brest qualified for the Champions League but haven't been able to capture the same form. It should be known though that 12th is more or less the norm for them, so don't be fooled. This was not a bad year for them at all. Angers scored 29 goals all season, tied with Nantes. Nobody scored less than those two, and Nantes were relegated. They survived anyway, and I guess they owe that to one very interesting stat. Across the entire campaign, Angers led a match and dropped points from it twice. Nobody in Europe's top 5 leagues held on to a lead better than that. And for one of the smallest budgets in the division, it's not bad at all. Le Havre could not finish teams off, and they would not fold. 14 draws all in all. 14! All while Auxerre spent 210 days of the season sitting inside the bottom 3 and somehow getting out without needing a playoff. Lassine Sinayoko did quite a lot of heavy lifting here, it seems. 12 goals, which is more than a third of everything Auxerre scored. The biggest disappointment in the country was undoubtedly Nice. They finished 4th in 24-25, but ended this one in the relegation playoff. That being said, it was the off-field antics that made the most headlines. After a November defeat at Lorient, Jeremy Boga and Terry Moffi were confronted and physically attacked by supporters at the training ground. Both immediately went on medical leave and then left on loan in January, which obviously makes sense. Franck Hayes was sacked in January, Claude Puel returned and could not stop the fall. But by the grace of God, they somehow reached the Coupe de France final, which, as we know, they lost 3-1 to Lens. 4 days later, they were in a relegation playoff against Saint Etienne. Thankfully for Nice, they won. A whirlwind of a 7-day period, and that's putting it lightly. Could you imagine if they actually won the Coupe de France? After 13 years in Ligue 1, Nantes bowed out thanks to probably the most egregious managerial merry-go-round in all of France, and then a pitch invasion. Coach Antoine Camboire left before a ball was kicked. Luis Castro was appointed and resigned in December. Ahmed Kantari took over and was sacked in March. Vahid Halilovic came back for another go, and Lens won 5 matches all year because of all of this chaos. On the final day, with relegation confirmed thanks to results elsewhere, hundreds of supporters came onto the pitch with flares, leading to the match being abandoned and the score being recorded as 0-0. The story for Metz isn't really a story at all. They came up, they went down. Metz won 3 matches, conceded 76 goals, and finished 15 points below the playoff place. At one point, Metz went 22 games without a win, which is the longest in the division. This was the club's 12th relegation from the French top flight and the 8th this century. Sad to say, nothing to see here. In a completely different context, in a whole different country, at the opposite end of the table, the same cannot be said about Barcelona. By late October 2025, Barcelona looked nothing like champions, and Hansi Flick's high line was thought to have been found out. First, they struggled against Rayo Vallecano, and then Sevilla smacked them 4-1 on matchday 8. Then they walked away from the Santiago Bernabeu with 0 points. Hansi Flick's response was to go on record and say that individual egos could tear apart the collective that had made the previous year work. It seems that the team stood up and took notice. Barcelona won 23 of their final 25 league matches, including an 11-game winning run through a really decisive period, and finished on 94 points. They scored 95 goals, 18 more than Real Madrid. Lamine Yamal, still 18 years old, produced 16 goals and 12 assists, walking away with the league's Player of the Season award. Pedri more or less ran games at whatever tempo he fancied. Fermin Lopez kept turning up in the box out of nowhere. Ferran Torres scored 16 without being a guaranteed starter. They took Joan Garcia from rivals Espanyol, who then proceeded to keep 15 clean sheets and be voted as the best keeper in the country. He also won a save of the season against Espanyol. It's pretty rough. Not bad for a team that played home games in 3 different stadiums, all of which they won, by the way. No home losses, no home draws. Does home ground advantage even mean anything if the home keeps moving? To them, I guess it does. The Champions League exit was a sore one though. For whatever reason, getting a red card when in the ascendancy or missing out on advancing thanks to narrow margins has been the Barcelona way since about 2015.
Take it quickly, Origi!
Oh, really sorry about that one. Real Madrid. Where do we even begin? A season that was supposed to be a return to triumph after a rare trophyless year that got Carlo Ancelotti the sack and ushered in the Xabi Alonso era. Xabi Alonso, a Real Madrid legend coming off the back of a wildly successful stint at Bayer Leverkusen. Trent Alexander-Arnold all but confirmed that he unlocked all the badges available on Duolingo with his first press conference completely done in Spanish. Dean Huijsen and Alvaro Carreras arrived to rebuild the defense too. All of it was assembled around Kylian Mbappe, Vinicius Jr., and Jude Bellingham. It looked good in the beginning, but all came crashing down by January. Alonso's authority fell apart in public. Vinicius lashed out after being subbed in the Clásico. Senior players were pretending to fall asleep in tactical sessions. Players were literally knocking each other out and running up the club's hospital bill. Less than 8 months after arriving as one of Europe's most admired coaches, Alonso was replaced by Alvaro Arbeloa, another legend who was working with the youth teams. Now, Arbeloa was highly rated himself at those youth levels and probably in line to take over one day, but it was just too soon and he clearly was not ready. Despite scoring 25 goals and winning the Golden Boot, Kylian Mbappe could not close the 8-point gap between Madrid and Barcelona. Of course, this was all while he was being blamed and labeled as the source of the club's problems. Mbappe had quite the year, you know. He actually won the Golden Boot for La Liga, the Champions League Golden Boot, and the World Cup Golden Boots. However, he won none of the actual competitions. Tough. On the other end, Villarreal had their best season since 2008. A 3rd place and a 2nd consecutive Champions League qualification. Thanks to coach Marcelino, the Yellow Submarine have a lot to celebrate. What they likely won't be celebrating is the fact that he confirmed he would be leaving after 2 straight years of Champions League qualification after a 5-1 win against Atletico Madrid on the final day. Dani Parejo was sent off into his next adventure after 6 years with the club. Atletico Madrid reached a Champions League semi-final, continuing their habit of frustrating Barcelona in Europe. The clubs have met 3 times in Champions League knockout history. Atletico Madrid won each and every time, including both times that they made it to the finals, both times that they lost, and unfortunately this time they didn't even make it that far after being dispatched by the Gunners. Apart from their run in the Champions League, there wasn't a hell of a lot for them to brag about. For the supposed 3rd best team in Spain, even that title was taken away from them as they finished 4th. The summer showed promise, but did not live up to it. They conceded 44 goals, more than any season under Simeone, apart from his first, which was back in 2011. And even that shouldn't be counted as he joined mid-season with the club in in 10th and led them to 5th. Hard to see this year as anything other than regression, and I haven't even mentioned the Copa del Rey final that they lost to Real Sociedad. A season that at one point had fans preparing sandwiches while enjoying good times in the Champions League ended with Antoine Griezmann leaving for good this time, and Julian Alvarez looking to force a move to Barcelona. Tough. 21 years after the last one, Real Betis are back in the Champions League. 5th place was enough because Spain picked up an extra berth through the UEFA coefficient. The GOAT, Antony, got his permanent return, and it is just great to see the man happy. Manuel Pellegrini's side were hardly ever dominant, however they did not make a habit of losing either. Only 3 losses at home too. Keeping the topic on record-breaking finishes, Celta Vigo had their best league finish in a decade, and this was one of those heartwarming stories. Coach Claudio Giraldez kept building an adventurous, possession-heavy team out of academy players and technicians. A 1-0 win over Sevilla on the final day sealed 6th and the Europa League. Their moment of the season, though, probably belongs to Iago Aspas. Scoring a goal against Nice on the night he broke the club appearance record is something that won't be forgotten anytime soon by him or supporters. Getafe, a story of admiration and hate poured into one. Hated by opponents due to their perceived dirty tactics and defensive rigidity, also admired by a lot of people due to the fact that Jose Bordalas started the season with 13 available senior players. At one point, 37-year-old defender Alan Nyom played as an emergency striker. Getafe finished 7th and qualified for the Conference League. Lowest possession in La Liga, fewest shots, most fouls. That's what people call textbook harambol. 38 goals conceded, a figure only Barcelona and Real Madrid betted. One of the best coaching jobs of the season, sad as it may be for many to admit. Rayo Vallecano had their joint best finish ever too. 8th place, a feat they've accomplished twice before. However, their story, it's not as heartwarming. The season happened in the midst of faulty pitches, hot water in the training ground not working, and eventually being banned from playing in their own stadium due to health risks and structural decay. The fan base and the players each ended up publicly protesting against the owners. 50 points and a Conference League final isn't too bad, I guess, but there was a very sour taste in the mouth of those faithful fans. After almost 2 decades, Valencia looked like they're finally about to have a new stadium to call home. Shovels were dropped on a massive project back in 2009, followed by money problems, Gary Neville, and owner disputes. Despite the good news, things haven't gotten all that much better. For half a season, Valencia looked like they were definitely going down. 16 goals in 17 matches and no way of moving the ball forward, only for them to somehow take 32 points from the second half of the season and finish in 9th. Although opposition to Peter Lim's ownership remains one of the longest running fights in Spanish football, and another year without Europe does not shorten it, so not as much to celebrate. 10th in the league and Copa del Rey champions. Both of those things are true, but luckily for Real Sociedad, only one of those things gets remembered. It was an interesting year. Martin Zubimendi left for Arsenal, leaving the club visibly weaker. Manager Francisco was sacked in December, and Pellegrino Matarazzo came in. Funnily enough, the president, Joaquin Aperibay, reportedly asked ChatGPT whether Matarazzo was the right appointment, and it said no. He decided to use some critical thinking and hire him anyway. A good move. Clankers aren't always the way to go. If we're all being completely honest, Espanyol's season was decided in June before a ball was kicked, when Joan Garcia paid his own termination clause and walked across the city to Barcelona. I mean, the squad handled it better than some predicted they would, free of relegation but not exactly high flyers, although they definitely had less expectations around them than Bilbao. Nico Williams turned down Barcelona and signed a 10-year contract at the start of the year. Athletic were back in the Champions League for the first time since 2014-15, and optimism was enormous. They then lost 19 league games and finished 12th. Europe was even worse, 2 wins and 29th in the league phase. Injuries and extra fixtures really did a number on them. Sevilla, 11 coaches in 9 years. Financial restrictions, years of recruitment mistakes, threats of relegation, news of Sergio Ramos leading a consortium that were looking to buy the club only for nothing to happen. For a club of this stature, survival should not be treated as an achievement. It's quite Spursy of them. if I'm being honest. Sevilla, Alaves, and Elche tied on 43 points with Levante and Osasuna on 42 each. All 5 narrowly escaped the drop. 42 points was the number that triggered the fall, and Mallorca were the unlucky ones to take the bullet. Spain does not separate teams on overall goal difference, otherwise Levante would have been the ones to drop. They use head-to-head results between the tied clubs. Interestingly, Vedat Muriqi scored 23 league goals, only Kylian Mbappe scored more in Spain, but evidently it was not enough. Girona were once the talk of the town in La Liga. 2 seasons ago, for long stretches of the year, they were the best team in Catalonia. There were murmurs of a title challenge, and they easily qualified for the Champions League. This year, they went down. Over 2 years, they got gutted of their best talents. This year, despite Mikel staying loyal as coach, they were in the relegation spots for more of the season than they were not. However, as we all know, the only thing that matters is how they finished. What might hurt the most is that on the final day, they needed a win against Elche, and it ended 1-1. Mikel left, and even though we don't need more of these, Girona is a cautionary tale for a small club that flew too close to the sun. Unless you're one of the big boys, it is near impossible to consolidate a position at the tippity top. It doesn't help that their wings are the City Football Group, but that's a story for another day. Real Oviedo, up at the start of the year and down at the end. It's not exactly groundbreaking stuff, but if you only remember the last 9 months, you missed the point entirely. Getting back into the top flight after 24 years mattered enormously to the people who waited for it, and I'm sure that they will forever be grateful. Over in Bavaria, however, the people are used to a different kind of story. It seems that they barely ever have to wait to be happy. Bayern Munich won the Bundesliga by 16 points, and the craziest thing about that is that number flatters everybody else. They scored 52 more goals than Dortmund and lost 1 match all year. 122 goals. Nobody in the history of the Bundesliga has scored that many. Vincent Kompany's second season further proved that hiring relegated Premier League managers isn't always the worst option. Thomas Müller, Leroy Sané, Eric Dyer, and Mathys Tel all left. They averaged nearly 3.6 goals a game. Harry Kane scored 36, won a 3rd consecutive Golden Boot in his first 3 German seasons, and got 4 league hat-tricks. The scariest part was that he missed 4 games for Bayern all year. In those 4, Bayern scored 17 goals. It did not look like they were missing him much at all. Michael Olise produced 15 goals and 19 assists and took the Player of the Season award. Luis Diaz added 15 and 14 from the other flank. 18 different Bayern players scored a league goal. They completed the double by beating Stuttgart 3-0 in the DFB Pokal final, but PSG made sure they did not make it a treble by stopping them in the UCL. Let the farming continue. Borussia Dortmund improved upon a horror year that saw them in 11th at one point a year ago, but somehow were able to secure a top 4 finish. This year, they returned to their regular 2nd place spot. An improvement I'm sure the higher-ups will want you to focus on more than the chasm between them and the champions. The football was not always thrilling. Niko Kovac made defense a non-negotiable, and the team are back to where they need to be. Going back to Joe Bellingham, following his brother's route out of England, he did alright. Judging by his parents' reaction to his game time, I wonder how they feel the excursion is going. Serhou Guirassy led the line with 17 goals. Julian Ryerson recorded 15 assists from fullback, which is an extraordinary number that probably needs to be emphasized more. Leipzig lost Benjamin Šeško to Manchester United, Xavi Simons to Tottenham Hotspur, Luis Openda to Juventus, and club icon Yusuf Poulsen to Hamburg, but qualified for the Champions League with a game to spare. Oli Werner arrived from Werder Bremen and built something younger and quicker. Jan Diomande was the clear revelation, a guy who only a couple of years ago was playing high school soccer in the United States. All of a sudden emerged as one of the most exciting young talents in Europe, where he began to play football. 12 league goals and relentless in one-on-ones, he's one to watch at Real Madrid. The interesting thing about Leipzig is that a team that lost 4 important players and came straight back into the Champions League would normally get widespread applause for that. Leipzig, they never do. And this isn't going to change while there's a can of Red Bull on the badge. it is what it is. 4th place and back to the Champions League. Stuttgart almost made it back-to-back Pokal finals. I mean, that almost is doing a lot of heavy lifting, if I'm being completely honest, but they made it to the final, and that's all that counts. Sadly, the 2026 version did not end as pleasantly as the 25 one did. Although, some might actually call that divine justice. The DFB later admitted that Freiburg, their opponent in the semi-finals, had a goal wrongly disallowed. A goal that may have taken the game to penalties, which, as we know, is a coin toss. The single biggest improvement in Germany came from a club few expected. From 15th to 5th, Hoffenheim did pretty well. They lost once across a 14-match run that dragged them into the Champions League conversation. The momentum did fade late, sadly, 1 point short of the Champions League. Leverkusen tried to replace a historic manager, most of a title-winning spine, and an entire tactical system in one summer. I was speaking about Girona being gutted earlier on, and try this on for size. This is the Bayer Leverkusen team that won the 2024 DFB Pokal. It includes all 20 players in the matchday squad as well as the manager. Only 7 of these people were present throughout the 25-26 year for Bayer Leverkusen. In came Erik ten Hag, who lasted 2 Bundesliga matches and 3 competitive fixtures, collecting 1 point and multiple accusations that he was using club resources to funnel funds towards an agency that he held a financial interest in. It's a pretty great return for my GOAT. 6th place for the former champions can't really be seen as a failure because they've been riding high for the last couple of years, but given the change in mood and personnel plus the previous years, it still stings just a bit. Fun fact, everyone from 7th place and below boasted a negative goal difference, which only makes sense, I guess, starting with Freiburg, who ironically finished 5th with a negative goal difference the season prior. But don't let that fool you, they had a year filled with a memorable run to the Europa League final, which they unfortunately lost, but they finished off the league campaign with a 4-1 win over Leipzig on the final day to confirm Conference League qualification. Eintracht Frankfurt were the epitome of chaos. 61 goals scored, 7th in the division, 65 goals conceded, more than every team that managed to survive and stay up in the league. The 6-4 win over Gladbach was probably a great advert for their whole season in 90 minutes. A brilliant watch, but completely uninterested in defending, still able to score though. Sandro Wagner took charge of Augsburg but was gone by December, leaving it up to Manuel Baum to save the day, which he did. After shoring up the defensive organization, Augsburg came away with arguably the biggest achievement of the year, being known as the only team that could beat Bayern Munich in the league. It's not bad. It's a pretty good achievement. Qualifying for Europe in the 24-25 year turned into a relegation fight in 25-26 for Mainz. Union Berlin was stuck in their weird limbo of being extremely hard to beat and being unable to score for weeks at a time. All the same, 11th. Stefan Baumgart was dismissed during the run-in and assistant Marie-Louise Etta took charge, becoming the first woman to lead a men's team in one of Europe's 5 major leagues. She was already the first female assistant coach in the Bundesliga and across the Big 5 in 2023 and had stood in for a suspended coach in 2024. Nonetheless, this is an incredible achievement that should not be understated, and hopefully it just opens the door for many, many more to come. Borussia Mönchengladbach stayed poor in possession and inconsistent in front of goal and accumulated just enough points to stay out of trouble. The number is 143. That is how many saves Moritz Nicolas made, more than any other goalkeeper in the Bundesliga. Brilliant goalkeeping, but a direct consequence of playing for a team that lets shots through with such crazy frequency. 6-time Bundesliga champions Hamburg finally returned to the top flight after 7 years away. 9 points from the relegation playoffs hit just right for them. Fun fact, one of their players was given maybe the best punishment in football. Jean-Luc Dompe, after driving under the influence, was made to buy and distribute 10,000 reflective safety vests. This was on top of a €100,000 fine. I give this punishment a thumbs up. The story of Cologne was Syed El Mala. 13 league goals and 4 assists from a teenager, acceleration and direct dribbling that made him one of the most exciting young German attackers. He gained some serious senior international recognition, but was not called up to the German national team for the 2026 World Cup, which had a few people questioning the tactics of the now resigned Julian Nagelsmann. Losing Oli Werner to Leipzig cost Bremen a lot more than they expected. Horst Stephan was sacked after match day 20 following a 10-match winless run, and Daniel Thion inherited a team sliding towards the drop. Victor Boniface's loan had looked ambitious, but Bremen never built a reliable attack around him, and he didn't exactly light the world on fire. There was also the small matter of a reporter confusing captain Marco Freidl with a Frankfurt goalkeeper live on air, which I imagine did wonders for the dressing room. 3 coaches, an 8-1 defeat to Bayern, and the end of 29 uninterrupted Bundesliga seasons, Wolfsburg had never been relegated from the Bundesliga until now. Similar to RB Leipzig, because of their ownership structure, they haven't gotten much sympathy from the German football scene. Heidenheim's 3rd Bundesliga season never recovered from a bad first half, and they conceded 72 goals, the worst defensive record in the entire division. Still, the journey from the lower regional divisions to European football is one of the greatest stories in modern football. Frank Schmidt has been in charge of the club since 2007, but has announced that he will likely be leaving at the end of the 26-27 year, capping off a 20-year stint. If you don't know how you should feel about this, then I'll tell you. This is simply extraordinary. They were in the 4th tier in 2007 and traveled all the way through to finishing 8th in the Bundesliga in 2024. That is out of this world. For St. Pauli, unfortunately, relegation was deserved, which finally brings us to Italy. Simone Inzaghi left after the 5-0 Champions League defeat to PSG. Inter's answer was Christian Chivu, whose entire senior managerial career consisted of 13 matches fighting relegation with Parma. At the time, it looked like a gamble. I mean, it was a gamble. And it didn't start promisingly. Inter lost 2 of their opening 3 matches. Then, they were undefeated for 15 games in a row, winning 14 of them through the winter, removing everybody else from the conversation. Clearly, the gamble paid off. 27 wins, 89 goals, 5 defeats. Federico Di Marco became the best player in Italy, taking the MVP award with 7 goals and a league record 18 assists from fullback. The Scudetto was confirmed with 3 matches to play, and the Coppa Italia followed. Lautaro Martinez won the Capocannonieri with 17 goals and scored in the Coppa Italia final. Chivu became only the 3rd manager in Inter's history to complete the domestic double. It's not so bad. Bodo Glimt, who were the standout story of the 25-26 campaign, managed to shock the world and knock Inter out of the Champions League in the knockout playoff, winning at San Siro on the way too. All of this happened 1 season after Inter Milan reached the final. That will follow the squad around for a while, I'm sure. Italy produced the lowest scoring season of the top 5 leagues, a stat that is underscored by the fact that Inter Milan notched 31 more goals than 2nd place Napoli. Napoli signed Kevin De Bruyne on a free transfer and brought Rasmus Højlund back to Italy, where he immediately started to perform on arrival, scoring on his debut, because of course he did. The year wasn't as sensational as the title-winning one in the last. Injuries were their bane as almost everyone spent time on the sidelines. Antonio Conte was almost never able to select the 11 he actually wanted, and as we know, Antonio Conte doesn't do well in those kinds of conditions. Scott McTominay continued his fine form, but Napoli never really got going. Even elimination from the Champions League, clearing up the schedule, was not enough to give them an edge. 2nd place, 11 points behind the top 3 ahead of Roma. Conte then left after another run of public disagreements with owner Aurelio De Laurentiis, bringing the end to a stint that was just extremely Conte-coded from start to finish. Roma hired Gianpiero Gasperini after 9 years at Atalanta and managed to equal his best ever finish with Atalanta in his first year in Rome. Miles Vilar was named Serie A's best goalkeeper. Evan Ndika anchored a defense that conceded 31 league goals, 2 more than Como, and 4 fewer than the champions. Donial Marlin arrived in January and scored 14 in 18 appearances, including a hat-trick against Pisa, which gave Gasperini the fast, direct, central attacker the system had been crying out for since August. 2 years after promotion, Como qualified for the Champions League with the best defense in Italy. Cesc Fabregas won 20 matches, scored 65 goals, conceded 29, and kept 19 clean sheets. He also did it while fielding the fewest Italians of any team in the league, which, of course, was controversial. Eduardo Goldeniga was reportedly the only Italian to play a single minute for Como all season, 14 minutes to be precise. Italy's most exciting football project was almost entirely a showcase of every other country's players, which is quite the observation in a year when Italy missed a 3rd straight World Cup. Not that that had anything to do with it, per se, but still an observation. Como spent more than 200 million euros across 2 years. A historically small club using unusually large resources is always going to be a controversy. However, we can acknowledge and appreciate the achievement nonetheless. AC Milan went 24 league matches unbeaten, spent long stretches in the top 2, and walked into the final day sitting 3rd, but they finished 5th. Allegri came to a club with no European football and rebuilt around Luka Modric, Samuel Ricci, Ardon Jashari, Pervis Estupinian, and Conny de Winter. For most of the season, it worked. Modric, at 40 years old, was supplying composure and leadership in a Serie A midfield. Mike Maignan kept being decisive in between the sticks. And then 7 points from their final 8 matches. Allegri was dismissed. Underneath all of it sat the approved sale of San Siro, which split supporters between the need for modern revenue and a fear of losing one of the most important buildings in the sport. The story, of course, is developing. Igor Tudor was gone in October, Luciano Spalletti arrived on a short-term deal, Juventus were a bit of a mess. Long gone are the days of Juventus farming the Italian league. In fact, they haven't even really challenged for the league in half a decade. Dusan Vlahovic hasn't scored a hat-trick since he was in that one hotel. For Italy's richest club, missing the Champions League like this is more than alarming. Ivan Juric had a tough task following from Gasperini with Atalanta. Sacked in November after a 3-0 home defeat to Sassuolo, stretched a winless league run to 7. Losing Ademola Lookman in January was also a blow. Europe was extraordinary in both directions. They overturned a 2-goal deficit against Dortmund, which briefly let Italy claim somebody had rescued its honor. For context, Italian teams were taking a bashing in the Champions League. Only one made it into the round of 16. It was Atalanta. They held the hope of a nation and then lost 10-2 to Bayern Munich on aggregate in the very next round. Not sure how much honor was rescued. Bologna could beat anybody, but could not do it twice in a row, which is why the Coppa Italia holders finished 8th. 16 wins, 8 draws, 14 defeats. Maurizio Sarri returned to Lazio, a club dealing with a surprise transfer embargo, significant departures, and an ongoing war between the supporters and Claudio Lotito, and the ghost of a falconer with a prosthetic junk. Don't ask questions, let's just move on. After reaching the Coppa Italia final, but losing to Inter, Sarri was out again. Udinese had their best finish in more than a decade. A club that spent most of the previous decade fighting relegation finished 10th. Di Natale would be proud, I hope. Domenico Berardi, who is still kicking by the way, helped Sassuolo to be the best promoted side in the league. Sassuolo had an interesting year and spent most of it kind of wrecking everyone else's seasons. The 3-0 win at Atalanta cost Ivan Juric his job. The late 2-0 over Milan played a big part in destroying Milan's Champions League qualification and likely contributed to Allegri's dismissal. It was a mixed bag. A 5-0 opening day defeat to Inter was an accurate forecast for Torino. 63 goals conceded, the worst outside the relegated clubs. For Parma, 13th place is not spectacular. That being said, Carlos Cuesta, keeping a club up after losing Kivu immediately before the season with his first stint in charge, deserves its flowers. Marco Palestra was the breakout player for Cagliari. Energy, defensive work, and attacking output from a right back. The Serie A's official Defender of the Season award, which for a 14th place club is quite remarkable. No team had ever survived Serie A after going winless through 14 matches. Fiorentina went winless through 15 and finished 15th. Stefano Pioli returned in summer and was sacked in November with the club bottom and still without a victory, and in came Paolo Vanoli, who inherited a crisis that ran into December. 1 win from 17 and a genuine chance of one of the most shocking relegations in Italian history. But it was a 5-1 win over Udinese that was the turning point. Vanoli organized the defense, found enough results to escape, and Fiorentina benefited immensely from it. Patrick Vieira was sacked in November with Genoa in the relegation zone. Daniele De Rossi took his first job since leaving Roma, and De Rossi made them more aggressive and considerably more emotionally invested. Although results stayed inconsistent, the football did improve, and Genoa got clear with 3 points to spare. Goals were desperately hard to find for Lecce, only 28 scored. The defensive organization kept them close enough for that not to matter. No humiliation, no spectacle, just a hard-earned survival job. And finally, Jamie Vardy ended his Leicester career and signed with Cremonese, a promoted Italian club which is precisely the sort of transfer that catches eyes online. But it was Bonazzoli who was their top scorer and a collaborative effort that kept them alive until the final day. Then, Como, needing a win for the Champions League, beat them 4-1, relegated. Hellas Verona and Pisa suffered the same fate. 34 years away, 1 season back for Pisa, the elements were never fully in their favor, and 2 wins in 38 games shows that this was never meant to be a prolonged stay up. Better luck next time, I guess. And there we have it. A look into all the clubs in the top 5 leagues, the major upsets, the major triumphs, and everything in between. How good was the 2025-26 football season? Pretty damn good, I think. Now, it's obviously impossible to talk about every single thing that happened over a 10-month period for dozens upon dozens of clubs across a continent, so let me know what I missed and we talk about it in the comments. That's all for me today. I hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you're having a great day. Cheers, and I will catch you next year.